I think you and I are today still medieval in how we think about not biological contagion, but ideological contagion. We are no different from our 13th century ancestors. Both sides are symptoms of a shared pathology, which is, I think, the neoliberal economic system stripping out everything. And so these two sides hate each other. And so the woke side look at the Trump side, say you're the disease and we're the cure, and vice versa.
And the existential threat as well.
I think obviously people, if they're supporting Trump, think he is the phoenix rising from the fire. He's the regeneration. But there's another way of seeing Trump, that he is not the phoenix, he is the fire. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing, by the way. Because think about what a fire is, like a fire in nature, a forest fire.
I think that should give us courage, exposure to other people's perspectives.
Moving us in a good direction.
You've argued that the liberal order is coming to an end. What's the liberal order?
Well, okay, first of all, thanks for having me on, Peter. So in the last 5 or 10 years, there's been a sense of society sort of decomposing. The tapestry of everything we were woven into has been coming to pieces. When we think about what is coming to pieces, we really need to look at what happened after World War II. So after World War II, or rather during World War II, as some people have argued, like the writer Tom Holland, he's argued that prior to World War II, the West was governed by certain positive Christian virtues. But actually, since World War II, we've been defined purely by negation, which is simply don't be a Nazi. And if you look at the entire of the culture since then, it's built around avoiding doing anything where you could be subject to that type of accusation or that sort of framing, quite rightly, of course. But what we've done is we've built international institutions that are designed to make sure that society remains orderly, and that's been running for the last 80 years. But also you see it reflected in the pop culture too. And what we've seen in the last 5-10 years are a lot of these institutions start to dissolve. We've seen a lot of the culture in general that framed this era also start to dissolve. So the liberal order, you can take it back further than that in terms of what it means. But I think what I'm talking about is that everything that became orthodoxy post-World War II has reached the end of its life cycle now.
Yeah, it's interesting. In American politics, the Republicans have largely run on the "we are not them" campaign. And I just saw Bill Clinton just today wished the Democratic-elect mayor of New York good luck. And that seems even the kind of more traditional liberals are held hostage to this far, far left identitarian, and then the Republicans say, well, we're not them, we're not them. So let's go back to this idea of post-liberalism. So what does a liberal world look like, and what does a post-liberal world look like?
Well, can I actually pick up on something you just said about the sort of the sense that politics is defined less by what we believe, but more who we say we are not?
Yes.
Yeah, can I just
sure,
stick with that for a minute? It's quite an interesting idea that if you look at the political spectrum, I see them as quite symmetrical. Like what's happening on the left and the right, call it the wokey left and the Trumpy right. They often hate each other. They see each other as the disease and themselves as the cure. But actually, I've always seen both sides as opposite but equal, or opposite but rather symmetrical symptoms of a shared disease that is in need of a cure. And the two sides really do seem to be very parallel. If you look at I'm caricaturing here, of course, but your typical Trump voter was seen as sort of blue-collar, middle America, right? Car manufacturing, this sort of thing. And then your typical sort of young social justice activist tends to be from a coastal city. They tend to be university educated, more aspirationally white collar. But if you look at the way their lives are playing out and their frustrations are playing out, they're very symmetrical. So on the Trump side, people have a very figurative use of language. Phrases like, make America great again. It was never quite sure what it meant. It seemed like...
See, I am sure of what that means because I'm old enough to remember.
That's interesting. Well, this is where I'm going actually with this, is that then if you go to the other side, they have a very literal use of language. They say words are violence. When they hear a joke, they strip it of context and intent. And so they look at the words as literally violence, not just words they dislike, but violence, which is a very literal understanding of language. And then, on the Trump side, they, as you just suggested, they're always looking back to a halcyon past when America was great, whereas the social justice people are looking to a utopian future where it will be great, perhaps for the first time. But what's interesting is both sides are unified by discontent with the present. And there's other symmetries too, by the way. I mean, on the left side, you have the sort of transgender movement, which is discontented with the body.
I just want to make sure I understand what you said. Discontent with the present.
Yeah, that's the unifying theme, right? I mean, everyone right now is discontent with the present, or with many things. I mean, The other example is, look at the trans issues, right?
Yeah.
The left have transgender as an ideology. What are they discontented with in that? Well, they're saying that the body is a limitation that people don't like. But what's happening on the right? You have the transhumanist movement, Peter Thiel and these people. They are also discontented with the limitations of the body. So actually, both sides have a trans movement, just one we tend to criticize more than the other depending on your politics.
Hey, did you know only half of you watching are subscribed? If you're enjoying the content, hit the subscribe button to keep the videos coming. Thanks.
So that's super interesting. So is the commonality then is I just love that idea of the discontent with the present. So,
well, all the things, Peter,
Yeah.
all the things we can't control, people are discontented with. We can't control the fact we're stuck in the present. We can't control the fact we're stuck in our bodies. So really, we have a culture that is militating against limitations. And it doesn't matter if it's coming from left or right. But just to go back for a second, with the Trump side and the social justice side, is that I really think they're quite symmetrical problems. I mean, okay, again, I'm caricaturing. The classic Trump voter, the idea is that they've had their dignity stripped from them by offshoring of jobs, and what's been left in those small towns is a dystopia. Now, as an example of this, if you go back to the 80s and you watch a movie about the American suburbs, say E.T., the American small towns were seen as a utopia, right? It was a beautiful place where magical things could happen. Now, if you watch a movie set in small town America, it's always a dystopia. It's Blackwater or something, you know? It's
God, that's so true.
Yeah, so there's been a shift in the narrative. So those people have been mugged by reality. And that's why we have the opioid epidemics, of course, because people are in pain, because their whole sense of identity has been stripped away in meaning, and they're numbing themselves against that. And it's why these problems are occurring in these small towns. And so you have on the people voting for Trump, they've seen their dignity stripped and it's gone overseas, and the jobs have gone overseas. But if you actually look at the left, you look at the social justice warriors, I think we need to see them in the same light. Because if you're a young, university-educated person, say, moving to New York City now, if you can afford to, when you get there, you got massive student debt, more than previous generations. You can't afford a house like your parents had. You probably can't find a job, and if you do, it won't pay very well, and it won't be very stable. And so all these people are being mugged by reality. And actually, and the point there is that if you look at these social justice warriors, they, in a sense, have no material possessions because they can't afford any. But what can they say the one thing they have? They can say, I have my virtue.
Yes,
they're like
exactly.
Franciscan monks.
Yeah.
Franciscan monks, barefoot but virtuous. Because if you don't have material possessions, then you're the middle classes who will never admit that actually you're poor now. What you can say is, well, I'm a really good person. And so I see both sides of this debate. Both sides are symptoms of a shared pathology, which is, I think, the neoliberal economic system stripping out everything. And so these two sides hate each other. And so the woke side look at the Trump side, say you're the disease and we're the cure, and vice versa.
And the existential threat as well.
What they see, so they see each other in existential terms. But my point is, everyone is misdiagnosing the problem. And on this, if I can just add an idea here, which is that in terms of how our society understands physical disease, we are modern. We're not medieval. We don't confuse symptom and pathology. We solved that hundreds of years ago in the biomedical revolution. But I think you and I are today still medieval in how we think about not biological contagion, but ideological contagion. We are no different from our 13th century ancestors because we are still constantly confusing symptom and pathology.
Explain that to me.
Okay, so during the Black Death, right, one of the reasons people couldn't cure things like that is they didn't understand the difference between a symptom and a pathology. They'd see the symptom, so the pustules, and they think that was a disease. They didn't know what the pathology was and where it came from. Because until you know those steps, you can't cure the disease. You can't deal with the symptom. But we got to understand how diseases spread eventually, and we've solved a lot of things like that. But then if you look at ideological contagion, we are constantly still confusing symptom and pathology. So for instance, the left and the right hate each other, and they look at each other and say, you're the disease and I'm the cure, and vice versa. But I'd look at them as opposite but symmetrical symptoms of, in fact, a shared disease, which is the neoliberal stripping out of everything, which is indeed in need of a cure. But the thing is, they are neither the disease nor the cure, they're just the symptoms. So Trump's supporters, Trump's proponents say he is a cure, and his opponents say he's a disease. Now, if you think he's a cure, fine. But if you don't like him, the most you can say is he's a symptom. You can't say he's a disease. I mean, Trump may or may not be a stable character, But the point is that there's a reason why he was someone that people wanted to elect. It's a sign of failure of the system that he was necessary, at least in his first term. I think Trump's doing a very different job now. He's an interesting character now as president. But, you know, I have a long feeling that Trump, I'm not sure if he's the phoenix, you know, but I think he's certainly the fire.
I hear the words neoliberal used in different ways. How do you mean that when you use it?
Well, I mean it in terms of this idea that we are no longer understood as first citizens or simply just people, but first and foremost as consumers. We're not ends in ourselves, but means to someone's economic end. And the context of that is that the neoliberal version of the economy is not simply a market economy, but a market society. So I'll give an example of what I mean.
Yeah.
In the 80s, we had, in a sense, the idea that we should all become entrepreneurs of our wealth, right? And prior to that, life was, you know, you had many other areas of your life. But in the 80s, people were saying, right, you need to become an entrepreneur. And that was the neoliberal start in the 80s and 90s. But then something else interesting happened. In the late 80s into the 90s and 2000s, we were also started to be told to be entrepreneurs of our, not just our wealth, but also our health. And suddenly you start to see food fetishes appear. Veganism takes off and all the other things that have come out of it. Suddenly gym culture appears in the 80s. In the 70s, if you went for a run, you know, the cops would chase you and say, what are you running from? In the 80s, you were doing it because they were running magazines and clubs. The marathons all started in the 1980s. Gyms, in the 70s, the only people who went to the gym were, you know, strange people like Arnold Schwarzenegger. By the 80s and 90s, everyone was going to the gym. So all of this health culture took off in the 80s and 90s. And also eating disorders and these sorts of things. Eating disorders have always existed, but they became epidemics in the 80s and 90s. Very interestingly, they've started to drop off in the mid-2000s, just as transgenderism took off, which is very interesting.
It's super interesting that you say that, and then I want to pick up on something you said. So one thing I've just learned recently is we had Mia Hughes on the show, and she was telling me that obviously trans is a contagion, but so is, we've gone through epics, like young women in particular are hyper susceptible to this.
Yeah.
They went from bulimia, I think this is the order, bulimia to cutting to trans.
Yeah.
And so all of these things are social contagions.
Absolutely, and they're all speaking to the same thing, which is a sense of discontent with the body, with the present, which we mentioned before, and
Discontent with the present. That should be the title of this episode, Discontent with the present. Yeah.
well, but so much is about this. But we are in a society that militates against contentedness, and this comes back to the neoliberal thing because you asked about that. So neoliberalism in the 80s was saying we all need to be entrepreneurs of our wealth. What it was actually doing is instilling in us a sense that unless we are incredibly wealthy, we ought to be discontented. Then what it shifted in the 90s to be entrepreneurs of our health, not just our wealth. So we telling us we need to be discontented with our body. And now in the last 10 years, what we've seen with neoliberalism is it's told us we have to be entrepreneurs of ourself, of our morality. You need to be discontented with yourself as a moral actor. And so what we've seen in the last 10 years is suddenly all of these social justice movements kick off, saying that you should be worried about the climate, you should be worried about racism and all these other things. Now, of course, these are real issues. Of course, racism exists. Of course, misogyny exists, many of these things. But the way this has now become a performative identity, like a central essence of who you ought to be, not just in general, but like actively on a daily basis, that's quite new.
So we've become discontent with our content.
Well, I think that's a good way of putting it, because I think what's happened is we've become normalized to things that are not normal. And this is the state of Western society in general. I mean, you could trace it back further, actually, because, well, let me ask you, what do you think the framing concern is, or priority of our entire political economic system? What is the most one thing if a government isn't overseeing that they're not getting reelected?
The economy.
Yeah, which means?
But well, I'm still lingering on that. I'm still lingering on that, like gym culture thing. That's a kind of discontent with the body. There's so much you're saying. I'm processing. But anyway, what does that mean? I'll bring myself up to the present. That means that we need to prioritize short-term gain over long-term success. Like that means that deficits become deprioritized in the minds of political leaders.
Yeah, and so it's basically growth, in my view. And now the growth imperative underpins everything in our culture.
Which leads to migration. Is that where you're
Yeah,
going?
well, it leads to so many things, right? But we need to pull back sometimes. And my background's in anthropology, and anthropology is all about pulling back and saying, why are we asking these questions? What are the assumptions built into this way of seeing the world? And there's something very interesting that's happened in the last 150 years that we in our generation are so used to. We're so used to our discontent that we don't even think about it, and which is the growth imperative. Because by contrast, according to the best historical data we have, which is patchy, from the year 1000 to 1500, Europe's economy grew 82% in 500 years. That is the same amount that China grew between 2002 and 2008.
Wow.
Okay, so the point I'm making there is that the acceleration of growth and the normalization to growth as an imperative and something normal and natural that we should pursue is a very modern phenomenon. It only started mid-19th century. There is an interesting book to be written by someone about graphs that do this. Because in the 19th century...
Exponential.
Yeah, so basically in the 19th century, growth did this, population did this, now we have the climate graph and CO2 emissions did this. Something very interesting happened at that point. And we're living with the consequences now, because for all of human history, the graph it wasn't a graph, it was a flat line, basically. There was minimal change and no one was tracking it. But suddenly, in the last 150 years, we've shifted the entire framing of society to aspire to things like growth that we didn't have. And it's the discontented thing that for centuries we were being told, I know you're an atheist, but the church was saying, you are enough in yourselves, in a sense. And then suddenly in the last 150 years, we've stripped it out and we're saying we're never good enough.
Okay.
And you see it manifest in the whole culture.
I'm going to offer an alternative causal explanation for that and push back on me if you think this isn't correct. The reason that we see exponential graphs across basically anything you could think of is because our technology has an exponential multiplier built into it. So for example, when you construct a pencil, the advent of any kind of writing implement technology enables you to create other technologies with that technology. Similarly, the advent of the microprocessor, the advent of the computer, all of those things are built into them exponential multiplier. That's why I think we get this idea of a singularity, because now with the advent of LLMs and AI, but maybe the main causal factor is there's something inherent in the tools we make that enable us to make better tools.
I think to an extent, but I tend not to be a technological determinist. I think that people determine the use of things, not things determine how the people are going to use them. And most technologies there have been technologies that have existed but have not necessarily taken off. But also they can take off in different ways. The printing press led to the proliferation of books, but didn't necessarily right away concentrate the economy. That had to have a number of other factors involved in it. So I think if your point is that technology and economy are connected, I do think there is definitely an example of this that's relevant to the problems we face today, actually. So I've been making the argument for a while that the technology of neoliberal economics is computing, and the political economy or the economy of computing is neoliberalism.
Oh, that's super interesting.
Because think about it. These big neoliberal corporations, these conglomerates that operate worldwide, the Walmarts, the Starbucks, and all these things, they could not exist without Excel spreadsheets and an internet connection. They could not exist, not in the form they're in. Not these service-based systems, not sort of last-minute supply chains and so on. You couldn't do it. And so for me, once you have computing, you kind of have to have a neoliberal system that is built into the computing. But the other way around is that if you're going to have a neoliberal system, you can only really have it if you have computing. So these two things, I don't see how we separate them. So I think we live in the age of the political economy of computing, in a sense. I don't really think we can separate them meaningfully. But there's an interesting implication of this, which is that, I'm slightly changing the course of...
That's fine.
Okay, so...
You're going to go are you going to talk about science?
Well, no, actually. Oh. But there's, okay, so if we're thinking about, if you accept my argument that computing and the neoliberal system are inextricably intertwined.
Yeah, intertwined is the perfect word. I accept that.
Yeah, and to the extent they're the same thing.
Yeah, I accept that.
So there's the economics of computing, in a sense. It raised the interesting question of what is our future politics? Because, there's a big misunderstanding, I think, about the 20th century. everyone thinks the 20th century were a very divided era because you had the capitalists and the communists. And I'm not sure this is true, because actually the communists and the capitalists actually agreed on a problem, because they agreed there was a political economic problem. They just had different solutions. So the communists said you should have a state-led economy, and the capitalists said it should be a market-driven economy. But they agreed that the economy was the problem. And so they were unified in the questions they were asking, just they differed in the answers they gave. The problem is today, what is the shared problem? There doesn't seem to be now any shared problem that the left and the right agree on. And the problem is that the reason we don't agree on the problem is that we think the problem is each other. You're the disease, I'm the cure.
That's such a good point. Yeah, I was just thinking about recent political, that is. I don't think we can agree on the problems. We can't agree on the problems of immigration. We can't agree on the problems of healthcare. We can't agree on the problems of the economy, and not even in terms of, should we have a progressive taxation, flat rate? We just can't even have a basic agreement.
Well, you can't, but no, I mean, the problem is, say with immigration, some people think it is the problem and some people think it is the solution.
Yeah.
So we are looking at the world through different lenses. And I think one of the big problems with the political spectrum now, I mean, I don't really know what left and right mean anymore.
Yeah, I don't either.
Or far left and
I've
far
said
right.
that repeatedly, yeah.
Yeah, but I do think there is a general, if you look at the classic sort of left and right, the way it used to be, the difference between the center left and center right and the far left and the far right, in my view, is this. The center left and center right disagreed on the answers, but not the questions. They disagreed on the solutions, but not the problems. But the difference is the far left and far right always disagreed on the problems because they assumed the problem is each other, and because it's very ad hominem. And the problem is society used to be shaped like this, where most people were in the middle and a few people on the margin.
Gaussian distribution.
Yeah, but now it's this way. Now at least online, you get the impression everyone's on a far side or the other side. And I think one of the problems with that, by the way, one of the reasons we have that, is on social media, it's a talking space, it's not a listening space. You can't perform listening on social media. You can only perform talking.
Yeah.
So everyone is incentivized to give views, and increasingly strong views, to get attention, so to strongly oppose things. And the problem is real human relations, a good human relationship, is founded more on listening than talking. We all know that if someone goes on a date, and the entire date someone's just talking at them, there's probably not going to be a second date. You've got to listen, right? And so we all know real human relationships are about listening, I think, more than talking. But online, it's an entirely narrational space. It's not a relational space. There's no human relationships on social media. It's just people talking to each other.
So there's so much here. So let's assume, which I think is very safe to assume, that the neoliberal order is collapsing?
Yes, I mean, it seems to be it's gone through sort of three stages, right? In the 80s, you had the fresh neoliberal period, which was a counterweight to what had happened in the 70s and stagflation and all these things. So it was a necessary counterweight. Then in the 90s, all the left-wing parties, so Labour in the UK, the Clinton administration in the States, they adopted what had been previously conservative and Republican ideas, Thatcher and Reagan, and they just internalized them and made them friendlier, with a bit more social, a few social projects around it. And then after the financial crisis, we've entered sort of the zombie era of neoliberalism, where we're trying to reclaim and recapture whatever the 80s were. And so what we're seeing, it's very interesting that Trump got elected, because Trump, in some ways, if you ask ChatGPT to generate a picture of a man who's a living embodiment of 1980s excess, you'd have Donald Trump. You'd have a guy from New York who's tall, who's brash, who's all about money, with a strange haircut. That's the man you'd end up with. I think Trump is comforting in some ways, because there is no other human being who's still alive, like a real human being, who embodies the 1980s good times in Donald Trump and the performance of that. So I think there is something comforting in the symbolism of him being there for a lot of people.
What do you think comes next? What's in the post?
Well, this is interesting. Okay, so if you take my idea that the 20th century had a problem, political economy, that everyone agreed on, but different answers, but now we don't. My sense, the coming politics in the coming decades, the central concern will be the status of computers in our society. So my sense is what we'll end up with in 100 years, because we're going to have a bunch of wars coming, and there'll be cyber elements, and as soon as I'm sure many governments have ways of shutting down every other government's healthcare system, and they've probably got it all set up ready to go if a war happens, but it's a bit of they'll have these options available, I have no doubt. So when a war comes and there's a big cyber attack and we all lose all of our email addresses and we lose our health records and all these things that are of real consequence, political parties will emerge that say our party will remove computing from at different levels. It could be from your personal life, or we will remove them from your offices as well, or we'll only preserve them for defense. Or some nations say we won't even have it for defense, we'll be under the umbrella of someone else. And other nations will go the other direction. They'll be much more intensifying with their computing. And I think what you'll end up with is something that's not like a Soviet Union, but probably, I don't know, an analog union, where you'll have...
Oh, interesting.
And I think what's probably going to happen is that the more individualistic nations in the West are more likely to be the ones where we start to vote in parties who slowly remove computing from our lives. And China, I think, will just go super digital. And so I think that's the coming divide, at least within the West, whatever the West means now, is about the status of computing, because we're seeing the impact of computing on all of our lives. We're all kind of addicts to these devices now. We're all trapped into this system of
as
digitization.
we're sitting here in the room, every single person here is on their device. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Everybody is
all
just
5.
Completely
Yeah.
whole time.
And it's just what we're saying is we're filming this, and everyone is just snorting cocaine off camera,
Yeah.
But that's the equivalent, right? But in a sense we're all kind of like that, and this is by design.
And I actually don't like that about myself. I got some coffee this morning, and I took the tram here, and instead of like looking at the Danube and looking at like this great thing, I'm stuck there doing email, texting my team. I'm like, I don't want to live like that, but.
You know what's interesting? Whenever I come to the office here in Budapest, I have to cross the river on the Green Bridge, the Liberty Bridge. Beautiful.
Yeah, I love that bridge.
The most beautiful bridge in the most beautiful city,
True.
I think, in the world.
100%.
And some days, like today, it's a glorious sunny day, and you can see right down the Danube, you can see the palace, you can see down to almost to Margaret Island, you can see the chain bridge. There's nothing like it. That view. And most of the time when I'm crossing, I find I miss half the bridge because I'm in my phone doing something, reading the news. And I've been trying to make an effort to put my phone down when I'm on that bridge and look at the river.
See, that's really good.
Because I think one day I'm going to look back and think, wow, I got to cross that bridge every day. Do I remember ever looking at it? And actually I try to, but the truth is usually I try and remind myself to look at it, and then I'll end up back on my phone before I've crossed it.
Without going into too many specifics in my personal life, there was someone in my life who was constantly complaining that I was on the phone. So then I made a conscious effort to not be on the phone. And then this person really needed to reach me in an emergency, but I had made a conscious effort to not be on my phone. And then when this person couldn't reach me, they were enraged that I was not on my phone to get their message. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there is but I noticed that in myself, and I don't like it. I don't really know what to do about it, because if I don't do that, that's why I like jujitsu so much, because I cannot be on my phone. Even when I'm at the gym, I'm constantly on my phone. I'm taking work calls, I'm doing emails. It's not a good way to live. But anyway, that specific prediction that you made, that's a hyper-specific prediction about, and if I may go down this slight rabbit hole.
Go on.
We see that in science fiction all the time, like third season of Picard or the old Battlestar Galactica. It's like, we need an analog technology to get us off the grid. Like, we need something that we're so connected and we're so digitized right now that, the old way is better, our way is better. And that's, I think, part of that is the Make America Great Again. Like I understand that Make America Great when I see, really disturbing trends in the United States. Yeah. And so, so
well, you kind of say on science fiction that some people say the greatest science fiction novel is Dune, published in 1965, I think. Yeah. And Dune is all about that. It's about how there's been something called the Butlerian jihad against machines, and so thinking machines are banned. Yeah. And so the world they live in is one where they don't use computers anymore. They just take a drug to become smart enough to do the computing themselves. So they ban computers. And actually, Dune is an interesting book to read. I read it a couple of years ago again, and it's prescient for a lot of the stuff that's happening now.
Yeah, that's how they, it's funny, if you ever want to make a science fiction story, and then I have a couple of other things floating around my head that's resonant in the conversation. If you ever want to make a science fiction story, you have to figure out how AI doesn't take over everything, and then you just make it illegal. But, you had made a comment before about young people can't afford homes. And we were in Oxford and we saw that Peter Thiel's talk, and he said something that I thought was so interesting, is that mass migration is a tax because people can't. It's like having a tax on the middle class, I would even argue in the UK, it's the upper middle class, certainly the lower classes. Young people can't afford homes. But I just want to get this out. If you're a young person and you're listening to this, and you're like, oh my God, what are we going to do? So the death of the laptop class is coming. AI is going to wipe that out. Get a vocation. Be an electrician. I told my daughter that 100 times. Be an electrician. I'll pay for it. Be an electrician. Do something that cannot be outsourced that does not work on a laptop. Be a carpenter. Be a plumber. Those things, you'll have a ton of money. You'll never have to worry about it. That's what I think. That's my sincere advice to young people. By the way, go ahead.
Well, on that, actually, I mean, one thing I find very interesting in the UK is the political left has suffered what I call ideological gentrification, where basically the middle classes have just pushed out the working classes, basically. So a lot of what constitutes the left now in the UK are performative sort of laptop class, anywhere class, as opposed to somewhere's preoccupations. So it's climate, it's international justice issues, Gaza,
I love
whatever it
that
may be.
ideological gentrification. Would that be similar to Rob Henderson's idea of luxury belief?
I guess so, yeah. I mean, it is a luxury. These are luxury beliefs, but the problem is, much like gentrification happens in a city where wealthier communities move in and push out the community that actually live there, as happens in every city, basically. We were seeing this on the left. The left was founded to represent working class interests in a time when they were not represented. And it did great work. The Labour Party did great work over the decades advocating for the rights of the British working classes. But now it's been completely colonized by middle class, university educated people, or people who have this bubbled understanding of the world.
That's true in the US as well.
Yeah, everywhere. And it's so, but I think this is connected to the fact that that class of people who are taking everything over are actually the class now which are far from being the people to solve other people's problems, and now the people whose problems will need to be solved by someone.
God, that's so true.
But because all their jobs are going. I mean, AI, a large language model can replace your job if your job is just language. It'll remain. Some jobs will remain, but it is true that's much easier to replace. But what's much harder to get a robot or AI to fix is a tricky screw that doesn't quite. It's very hard and fiddly at the back of the sink,
Right.
or the plumbing underneath the sink. So I think you're right on that. Yeah.
Do you ever think like, wow, these things are so obvious to me. Why aren't they obvious to anybody else? I'll put that on myself because I don't want to seem like a dick.
Yeah,
Like,
no. Well, I mean, I think that the truth is, I mean, I've always believed this, that, when you read a good novel, or you watch a good stand-up comedian, or you listen to a good podcast, or whatever it is, when it's good.
Like this one.
Like this one, exactly. But the thing is, when you're watching it, when it's good, when a stand-up comedian's good, the reason you laugh isn't because they're saying something obvious, nor are they saying something abstruse and difficult. Rather, they're helping you see for the first time what you've always been looking at. So that you laugh because you go, oh, that's so true. I see that every day. Or you read a good novel, you go, oh, it's so true. I see that every day. And what they've done is there's a great line from, I think it's Emerson, and I'm not applying this line to either of us, but it's a great, the concept is good. He said, in works of genius, we see our own rejected thoughts. They return to us with an alienated majesty. And what he's saying in that, I think, is that when there's a really good idea out there, or where there's and you go, that's so true, is that the reason it resonates with us is that we've totally noticed it, but perhaps we never had the courage to observe it, because so much about life, I think, is, like, all the facts are in front of us. The question is, how do you connect them? There's a great philosophical idea of the Gestalt, the duck rabbit. You know that image? It's a duck and a rabbit at the same time. And I think a lot of life is about, seeing a duck and saying it's a rabbit, in the sense that, the facts are given to all of us, but how we connect the facts is different.
Do you think the duck rabbit is? You think that?
Well, so the point in that is that if everyone is saying it's a duck, it's actually an act not of intellect but of courage to say it's a rabbit, because actually the problem is not narrational. What is it? It's relational. Am I going to disagree with these people?
Yeah.
And so I think so much of society, given we're a social animal, sometimes we're inhibited from speaking what's in front of our nose. I mean, Orwell said it takes a constant struggle to see what's in front of our nose. He's kind of right and wrong, because if that's the correct quote, because we do see it. The struggle is not to see it, the struggle is to say it. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people struggle with. And I struggle, you struggle, everyone struggles with it. And the problem is sometimes you need someone to be completely mad. Sometimes people who are geniuses are mad and they say things, right? But the reason the madness is just that they're not subject to social convention. So they see what we see, but they have the courage to say it, or perhaps they're socially oblivious enough that they don't think of the consequence of saying it. They don't fear the ridicule or the marginalization, so they say it. So in terms of things being obvious, I don't know if things are obvious so much as that we're talking in Hungary here. Some of the things we're talking about, I may not have been that comfortable talking about in the UK 5 years ago. But Hungary is a very different context to say these things, because certainly in the community I'm in, they're not hidebound by the sort of performative political correctness that has colonized our culture for the last 30 years. And the colonization is true, by the way. Like, you know, we keep hearing about universities, we keep hearing this idea of decolonized curriculums. You know what I hear whenever I hear that phrase? I hear, say in England when I hear it, I hear us being colonized by America's moral panics.
That's exactly, I've been saying for years, it's a neo-colonial export.
It's 100%, because you know, the Brits, we used to go to Africa and say, look at these benighted people, let's bring them Christianity or something, right? And that's what 150 years ago. So we looked at them and said, they're not moral enough agents, we'll bring them a moral framing. But now we're having the same thing happen to us from the United States. Americans are coming to Britain, American managerial structures are coming to Britain, and they're saying, look at you immoral people, you need to fix your thinking. And it's the same impulse.
Yeah, I want to go back to what you said before, because I've been thinking about that a lot as well, that why didn't so many people speak out about the moral panic? And I'm going to push back on a couple of things today, and I could be completely delusional about this. I personally have not found it that hard to call bullshit on things. But maybe it's just because I have not called bullshit on some and called bullshit on others. And I'm wondering two things. I'm wondering if there's a kind of attitudinal disposition that certain people possess that make it easier for them. Or maybe, so I'll just dump this on you, but push back if you think that this is, so I keep thinking about that line in Aristotle that really changed my whole life. And that was basically the highest form of friendship is between two virtuous people. And so if you call somebody out, if you call an idea out, yeah, a lot of people are going to hate you, but the quality of the relationships that you have will be extraordinarily high, because another person of virtue will see, even if they disagree with you, or they'll say, hey, I disagree with you, but you can have that conversation. And every time someone doesn't do that, they demean not only their own agency, but their capacity for fulfillment in terms of being in a relationship, a friendship of virtue. So you kind of do an injustice toward yourself every single time you don't speak up against some insanity.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I think we have to trade in honesty. I don't know about truth in the sense I'm never quite sure what we mean by truth, but I do think if you render the world in the way that you think is most honest, then I think we have a basis for something.
Yeah.
But actually the crucial point in that, actually, I think, now I think about it, is that so much in our culture now encourages us to have answers, to be certain. Like, we're always being told we must have certainty, we must have answers, we must have the truth. And I kind of think it misses the point, because it's all hubris. It's all hubris to say we need answers, we need to have certainty and to pin the world down. This whole culture we have of saying if we can just get enough data, presumably the world will be just perfect. Yeah. And I just fundamentally disagree with this, because I think the human condition is founded, or ought to be founded, in a humility. Humility to say we can't know, we don't know, is beyond our ken to know. And so if we started from the humility of asking questions or doubt, rather than giving answers and having certainty, we'd get on much better. So the problem in a human relationship is when I say, you must do this, right? That's when we start having tension. But if I say, how do you see things? What would you like to do? What's your perspective? Being asked that it achieves so many things. You may learn something, the person will feel included. There are so many things that happen when we have the humility to ask questions rather than to give answers. Yeah, so I think it's not even about, I think fundamentally the real problem we have in society is that there is no value society gives anymore to humility at all.
So that's why, so two things there. One, I think it's so important when someone says, I don't know, to say that's a great answer, or thank you so much. Because there's been a long time epidemic of both pretending to know things you don't know, and now we're in this area of pretending to not know things that everybody knows, like what a woman is.
Yeah.
And so there's been a shift in that. But, I want to riff off something you said before. So if we're in this situation in which there's an epidemic of cowardice and no one's speaking out, I would argue that the unforeseen consequence of that is a universalizing damaging of friendships. Nobody has genuine friendships with anybody anymore because no one knows what anybody actually believes. They only know the verbal behavior of somebody. And the only way you could be friends with someone is if there's a lawful relationship between what they think and what they say. And so it does seem to me that that's what tribal affiliation yields. It's a damaging of friendship. But people perceive that as becoming closer because, oh, this person has, and maybe they actually do mean it. But with stifling political correctness or blasphemy, you never really know what anybody means. Anyway, I was just thinking about that when you're speaking, and I think the right and the left, again, I agree with you. I don't think those are useful terms anymore, but broadly speaking, like as in terms of political orientation.
Well, you just mentioned about tribalism, and something I think worth mentioning is that we've gone through this era that I think you've been subject to, this sort of cancel culture era, right? And I've never really liked the term cancel culture because it's a new term for an old concept, which is just ostracism, where we ostracize someone, or tar and feather them. We cover them in tar and feathers and send them off to the forest. And it does seem to me that throughout human history that whenever, well, we find it quite shocking, ostracism, because we like to think we don't practice it. But I think one of the issues is that what we've seen in the last couple of decades is an invention of an entirely new way of communicating, social media and the internet, which has led, of course, to new norms and new standards of how we interact on there. We've invented a new way of communicating, so we have to come up with new etiquette for how we do it. And I think what happens is before we've attained or arrived at a sense of the etiquette for how we interact, then we fall back into sort of pre-civilized sort of mentality, and so we are sending people to the woods. So there's something to do with the cancel culture. I think it's the re-emergence of something, it's the bubbling up of something that's there in human societies, because we are social animals, the ostracism happens. But what we've done in our society, we've built systems and structures where we kind of have disguised this sort of behavior. But we've suddenly, because we've ripped off the old culture and we haven't quite finished building the new one yet, we're seeing kind of like lava popping up through the magma of the civilization.
Yeah. All right, you mentioned to me before that some people think of Trump as a phoenix or a fire. Like, what do you, like, talk me through that. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, look, I think obvious people, if they're supporting Trump, think he is the phoenix rising from the fire. He's the regeneration. But there's another way of seeing Trump, that he is not the phoenix, he is the fire. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing, by the way. Because think about what a fire is, like a fire in nature, a forest fire. Why do they happen? Well, inevitably, you have dead wood everywhere. And you need to have small fires to burn off the dead wood to create the ash, which creates fertility in the soil from which new growth can spring, right? So forest fires are an entirely natural phenomena. The big problem they've had in literal forest fires in the States is not the fire itself. It's the fact that for a long time, no one was clearing up the dead wood. And so what you had is a lot of dead wood, a lot of fuel built up. So when the fire happens, it's a massive conflagration that burns down cities. The analogy here, so forest fires are natural, but if there's too much dead wood built up, the fire can get out of control. The analogy to Trump, I think, is that what we're seeing in Trump is a bonfire of all the vanities of the politically correct culture. But the problem is all of these vanities have been building up for 30, 40 years. There's so much dead wood built up in the culture of the West, the culture of the United States, all this political correctness and all these different things. There's so much fuel there that now that the spark has been lit and the fire is raging, it could actually get out of control. And so, because Trump is, he's effectively burning things down, and people say this all needs to go, but there is a possibility it also burns down everything. And so I think with Trump, we need to see him as a bonfire of the vanities of the culture. It was inevitable. In some sense, it's healthy, but it probably needs to be managed. So this is the challenge with the partisanship around Trump, is that his opponents look at him and say, he's just a crazy, out of control fire, he's going to burn everything down. They don't understand there's health in that, in having a fire. The problem with his supporters, though, is that they think every fire is a good fire, that everything that burns down is good. And that's obviously not true. That's not how fires work. So so I think it's a case of all things proportion and moderation, and someone needs to be a bit moderate around things. And I think if he is the fire, I think that potentially then that lays the ground for something more constructive to come later, perhaps J.D. Vance.
Are you hopeful about the West, the future?
Well, it's tricky to be hopeful. I mean, I do think there's a bit of doom mongering going on, to be honest. Twitter is not the real world. I mean, if you look at social media around the UK, it's very negative, but I live in the UK when I'm not here, and the rural UK hasn't changed that much. The prices have gone up quite a lot. So I think the rumors of its death are somewhat exaggerated. But I think the one thing the West has, which China doesn't have, for instance, is that we're nimble, is that we can talk about our problems and we can debate them, and we're creating new cultures all the time. We're not a top-down system. And so I think the point is there is no clear plan of how things should evolve and can be saved. But I think the point is that given it's a very dynamic culture, I think things will probably adjust. But the culture that we have in 10 years, we won't recognize. And I mean, I think it's one point on this worth making. We started at the beginning of this interview talking about the liberal era and what was it. There's an important point to make, I think, that kind of captures this, that if you look around the popular culture, all of the popular culture is stuff created for the boomer generation after World War II. So all the major films being made are these comic book movies. That's all based on comics that the boomers watched when they were children in the 50s. All the music we listen to now is the music they started listening to as teenagers in the late 50s and 60s. All the movies we've watched, like the Star Wars and stuff, are the movies they started making in the 70s and 80s. As soon as they, by the way, were old enough to become president of the United States in 1993, boomers became president. Bill Clinton was born in August 46, replaced by Bush, who was born a month before him. Obama's a bit of an exception, but almost lost to Clinton, born in 47. And then Trump was born in June 46. So these three. And then Biden as well was 42. So really, from 1993 to at least 2029, the United States has been governed by someone born in the summer of 1946.
Like a gerontocracy.
With the exception of Obama, born in 61. But basically, we've been trapped in one generation's life cycle for the last 80 years. But there's an important point in this, which is that there's almost nothing in the culture pre-World War II that was generated pre-World War II that's contemporary pop culture. It's all, if you go to the books made in the 30s or anything made in the 30s, it's all the classic section. The music is all the classic section. It's everything from World War II is the current culture. But it feels that that culture is reaching its end. All the stories we've been telling for the last 80 years in the Western culture, they've all been the same story. The big ones, the Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Harry Potter, the big intellectual properties, the superhero stuff, they all have the same plot. It's World War II. It's the moral, plucky underdog fighting the world-destroying evil, and we defeat them. That's the story of Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Star Wars, all the superhero movies. So we've been repeating ourselves the origin myth of the liberal era for the last 80 years. But we've got to the end of that cycle because World War II is no longer memory. It's passing out of human memory. It's now a historical fact. But it's not one that many people remember now. The whole generation brought up on all of these ways of seeing the world are passing now. And so my point is, you asked, what am I hopeful for the future?
Yeah.
Well, I think whatever the future will be, in 10 years, 15 years, probably after some coming cataclysm, will be so different in its frame of reference that our entire frame of reference of the last 80 years will be as redundant in 20 years as 1930 culture was by the 1960s.
Interesting.
That's my sense.
Interesting. So in full disclosure, we're friends. And
well, you may think this, Peter.
Well, no, well, maybe I'm harboring.
No,
I'm harboring under. And we go out and we always have some spirited conversations, which I like, and we don't often agree, but those conversations are always fascinating to me, and I always.
You're saying you're wrong occasionally, is what you're saying.
No, don't get carried away now. But we went out the other night, and you told in a fantastic joke, and the framing of the joke was that. It's a Hungarian joke, and people outside of Hungary usually don't get the joke. And I've been thinking about that joke since you told it. I think it's fascinating. What is the joke?
Okay, so it was a few weeks ago, a father of a friend of mine and he's Hungarian. He said, Calum, he said, you've been in Hungary a few years. I want to ask you to a joke to see how Hungarian you are now, because foreigners never get this joke, and indeed they don't find it funny. And I said, tell me the joke. And he told me the joke, and I got it, but I didn't find it funny. But I understand why Hungarians at least get it. And the joke goes something like this. It's called the bear's death list. So a rabbit goes up to the bear and says, Bear, am I on your death list? And the bear says, yes. And the next day, the rabbit is found dead. The next day, a deer goes up to the bear and says, Bear, am I on your death list? And the bear says, yes. And the next day, the deer is found dead. And on the third day, the hedgehog goes up to the bear and goes, Bear, am I on your death list? And the bear says, yes. And the hedgehog says, would you be kind enough to remove me? And the bear says, sure.
God, I love that. But people are going to watch that and not, the Hungarians are smiling. People who are watching that, to explain I know it ruins it if you have to explain, but
because it's interesting that I kind of get it.
Yeah, I kind of get it too.
But I don't find it that funny. But my Hungarian friends think it's a really fucking funny joke.
Yeah.
Like it's a very, very funny joke.
Yeah.
So so basically what it's about is about the arbitrary power of the bear. Because so to escape the bear, you don't need to be quick or smart. You just have to be polite to the bear. And I think to some extent it's a reflection of the communist era, where there were a lot of lists people would be on. But sometimes to get removed, you didn't have to have guile or cunning, or you didn't have to run away. You just had to find the person who was in charge of it and politely ask you to remove them. So it's about kind of the arbitrary and whimsical nature of power, and sort of the vanity too, that someone just wants to be asked politely. And so a way to solve problems often. And actually, I tried this out. I have a friend who's a good friend of mine, but he often makes jokes, says, you're in my black book. And I said to him once, I said, I won't say what his name is, but I said to him, am I still in your black book? And he said, yes. And I said, would you be kind enough to remove me? And he said, sure. And then ever since then, he's no longer been using this black book thing. He's just been super, super diplomatic with me whenever we have to work together. So it's very funny because actually it worked.
Yeah, interesting. I just love that joke. I think it's incredibly profound. Okay, is there anything I should have asked you that I didn't ask you?
Science and society, but we could.
We ran out of time.
We can do it another time.
Well, thank you. Where can people find you?
In my office in the Danube Institute, dealing with a lot of administration. So wait, no, serious.
You're
question?
online?
Right. Yeah, I have a Substack called Notes from the Isthmus, and that's probably the best place to find me.
Awesome. And if someone's in Hungary and they want to have dinner with us, that'd be fantastic too. All right. Good. Thank you so much for having a conversation.
Pleasure. Thanks, Peter. Good to see you.
Right on.
All right. See you.